I have come to believe that the most important function of religion is to provide some kind of justification or hook for the commitment to moral performance. In your new paradigm for Christianity, what would that hook or foundation for moral performance be?
Yeah, what would be the hook or foundation for moral performance? Let me begin with an implicit contrast, and maybe I shouldn't assume that you had this in mind. But the implicit contrast would be, say, a final judgment as kind of the motive for seeking to live as much in accord with the will of God as you would want, whether that final judgment is based on faith or whether it's based on, have you visited those in prison, and have you, how does it go? Fed the naked? No, okay, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So that notions that there's a final judgment don't have to be trivial in the sense of you got to get your beliefs right. And if you were baptized as an infant, not as an adult, sorry. And I'm exaggerating there. But a century ago, there were many Christians who thought that. But if there's not that sanction or motive, but what might it be? And here I now respond more directly to your question. It would be a great conversation to have in your local circles even. My way of answering it would be twofold. Grounded in what I see as two deep human yearnings that are found in almost all of us. I'd say all of us, but then we could argue about whether there are exceptions. Namely, I think most of us yearn for a fuller connection to what is. That the best moments in our lives have been those moments when we have felt most fully connected to what is right there. And for me, that's the yearning for God. That yearning for connection to what is all around us, that one in whom we live and move and have our being, and the universe is shot through with the presence of God, and we yearn for that connection. I think the second yearning that runs very deeply in most people is a yearning that the world be a better place. Now, there can be all kinds of arguments about how it becomes a better place. But I think most people want the world to be a better place, whether for our contemporaries or for our children and our grandchildren or whatever. Put those two together, you've basically got the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. I think that it's not really a sanction so much as it is an invitation. That this life that we talk about, ideally, in church, addresses the two, I'm going to say, deepest of human yearnings, for that connection, and that the world be a better place. I don't know that that's sanctioned so much as the reward is the thing itself. Yeah.
My question is, in these modern times, when it appears that Americans are leaving formal religious institutions, do you believe that your emerging Christian paradigm can be practiced outside of mainstream religions?
Yes. I don't know if you have a particular movement in mind or if you have, say, an individual practicing it outside of institutionalized religion. Having said yes, let me add something. It's possible to be a solitary spiritual person. And, we can, that is to say, it's not absolutely essential that you be part of a religious community, whether Christian or something else. But I think we need to take seriously that the experience of religious community can be deeply nourishing. And if it's not for you, find another one, okay? That's a primary purpose of Christian community, to nurture a deeper and deeper centering in God. And then, of course, another purpose is to be active in the world. Okay? And I think to do it by oneself, when there are the riches of community and the richness of a tradition properly understood, available, is like, kind of scrounging around for roots and nuts when there's a banquet set up, right there. The church is obviously a mixed bag. I don't mean that it's simply a rich banquet. But Christian community that is kind of really Christian community is enormously nourishing. Last quick comment about that. I value being part of a community that has a past, even though it's a mixed past. Being part of a community that contains words and music and so forth from hundreds and even thousands of years ago helps to deliver us from the provincialism of the present. There's a kind of parochialism of the present that is very limiting. A quick story. After the 2004 presidential election, a very close friend of mine who had been a Republican until about 2002 and changed his political convictions, said to me after the 2004 election, he said, "I wonder if the difference between red states and blue states is who has a passport." Now, obviously, many conservative political people have passports because they're wealthy and they travel. But it made me think that I wonder if somebody who has spent several weeks at least in a foreign country and not just in a resort someplace is more likely to be a progressive voter than somebody who's never done that. The point being, travel helps to deliver us from the provinciality of culture. Tradition helps to deliver us from the provinciality of the present. Or you could say history helps to deliver us from the provinciality of the present. So I want to put in a strong plug for community, even though I don't think that one needs to be Christian to see the world in the terms I'm describing.
Speaking of presidential elections, you care to comment on religion and this presidential election in this way that seems relevant to you?
Yeah. Well, I'm encouraged by some things I hear and see. Jim Wallace reports, for example, that there are a growing number of evangelical Christians who have become disenchanted with our country's present course, particularly with regard to the environment, also to some extent with regard to the war in Iraq, and so forth. So that religiously motivated evangelicals will not necessarily all be politically conservative this time around. I basically am encouraged by the return of the language of faith to the campaign. There's a kind of honesty in that. There can also be a duplicity in it, of course. One of my fears is that religion might end up being used mostly negatively in the rest of the campaign. If Obama should get the nomination, I think we're going to hear a lot more about the Jeremiah Wright tapes. For people who haven't been following that and don't have a context in which to put it, those short bursts, here's Obama's pastor, I think they can be very destructive. So I'm, mixed. Okay.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Dr. Borg for all of your writings. I can remember a time when I was yearning for that spiritual connection, and I was able to turn to your writings, and I found that connection. So the first thing I want to say is thank you. And just to give you a context for my question, I grew up in a rather literalist tradition that espouses the earlier paradigm that you talk about. And I continue to be a part of that tradition. Actually, it's my family's tradition. So I continue to stay connected. Now, growing up, that paradigm definitely was an intellectual obstacle, as you talked about. It just no longer made sense for me. So now that I'm comfortable with understanding the Bible's human origin, perhaps its openness to errancy, my question is, how can someone like me, or how can one regain that appreciation and respect for the Bible after coming to kind of this place in life where you understand that, you know what, it might not have been all that you kind of thought it would be.
Yeah. Okay, how does one regain an appreciation for the Bible, having left the earlier paradigm? Let me begin with a brief negative story, and then I'll try to respond positively. I was one of two keynoters at a Disciples of Christ seminary in this country maybe 10 years ago for their annual clergy conference. And the other keynoter is a well-known, well-respected, mainstream theologian. So not evangelical or fundamentalist, but mainstream theologian. And a real advocate of narrative theology, which is, kind of theology that takes story very, very seriously. Not sort of easygoing stories like, Mr. Rogers might tell, but, that the real focus in the Bible is on story and not on what's behind the story. And the same fellow, a good man, is very, very critical of what he calls historical critical scholarship. So he's very critical of people like me. But when I hear him talking about story, I think to myself, but that's also what I think. So I finally asked him during one of our public dialogues, I said, well, why are you so negative about the historical critical method? I said, you couldn't do what you do without it. And he said, it's because in seminary, the historical critical method took the Bible away from me. And that has been the experience of some people. And it was probably true that a couple generations of historical critical scholarship was more involved with, it didn't happen this way, than in trying to introduce a way of seeing and hearing the Bible that is, I would say, even more powerful. So that's the prologue then to what will sound self-serving. I really suggest to you my own book, because it's written for folks who have exactly the question that you're asking. And the title of the book is helpful, I think, in suggesting why. The main title is Reading the Bible Again. I don't know how my publisher ever thought of that one. But the subtitle is Taking the Bible Seriously, but Not Literally. And so it tries to introduce the way of seeing the Bible that I've been talking about tonight, but for the Bible as a whole. I don't mean for every chapter, but for the major portions of the Bible. The Torah, the prophets, the wisdom literature, the Gospels, Paul, the book of Revelation, and so forth. And for me personally, the way of seeing the Bible that I'm speaking about has become so much richer for me than anything I ever experienced in that earlier way of seeing it. So it's a word of encouragement and to some extent recommendation.
I'd like to thank you also for this evening and for your books. I found them really helpful in retrieving the Bible. My question is part of the emergent vision you have that's both personal and political at the heart of Christianity. As I understand, like what you did in the last week, that political element, getting back to Jeremiah Wright, I kind of understood what he preached on roughly consonant to what you were writing in that book. Is that an accurate characterization? If not, can you clarify what you're doing when you speak of it as political?
Sure. No, it's accurate. And to let the rest of you in on the fuller context of the question, in the book, one of the books that Dom Crossan and I have written together called The Last Week, which is a day-by-day account of the last week of Jesus' life as Mark tells the story. Without going behind the story, we simply point out how, in our sense of the word, political that story is. It's also religious. It's religious and political all at the same time. And the book as a whole is an answer to the question, what was the passion of Jesus? Not meaning what was his suffering, but what was Jesus passionate about? Because what he was passionate about is what led to his passion in that narrower sense of the word. And the central claim of the book, based on Mark's telling of the story of the last week, is that the passion of Jesus was the kingdom of God, which was about God's passion for a world of economic justice and nonviolence. And the authorities killed Jesus because he was starting to attract a following, and quite frankly, they didn't really care all that much for his vision of the way things could be. So in this respect, Jesus stands in the tradition of the great prophets of the Jewish Bible. And when you do hear, say that little soundbite from Jeremiah, right? God bless America, God damn America. He's really echoing the language of the Jewish prophets. There's all kinds of condemnation in those prophets of their own country because their country has become rife with injustice and chronic violence. And so instead of God bless Israel, the prophets are saying God is condemning Israel. Don't read that as the Jewish people. The indictments are of the ruling elites of temple and monarchy at the top of Israel, who are really the oppressors and the source of injustice and chronic violence for the peasant population. Okay? So it's not the kind of soundbite you want on your campaign, but if you contextualize it, not only within the prophets, but within the tradition of African American experience and worship, it's very biblical.
If it's all right, I'd like to change the subject slightly. I hope I'm not too far off. This is in connection with the current extreme tension between Christianity and Islam. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if I have the facts exactly right, but if I remember, it might have been Edward III, the King of England, that conquered Wales, and at the same time, he said to all the Jewish residents, the Hebrews in England, that you have to leave because you believe only the Old Testament, not the New. So where did they go? A lot of them went to Spain, not to the Spain of Isabel, Ferdinand and Isabel that sent Columbus to discover us, but to the southern part of Spain that was still ruled by the Moors. And what religion was the Moors of Granada and Seville and the Alhambra? It was Mohammedanism. It was Islam. And where did the Jews live, the ones that did go there, where did they live in harmony, their religion with Islam? In Spain there, southern Spain. And it was many centuries before an English monarch decided that was the wrong decision. Yep. And in fact, Queen Victoria's favorite prime minister was a Jewish person. If the